Hello everyone, it's Mrs. St. Clair, your math queen, where we like to keep math simple and take it back to the basics. Let's check out Objective 17, example number 5. This is going to be our final example for Objective 17. Solving real-world problems, multi-step, involving ratios. We're going to use our proportional reasoning to find out how many students that were females attended this carnival. Let's get into it. So we have a building. It's Riverside. And Riverside has 227th grade students. And its ratio of boys to girls is 5 to 6. Salem has 287th graders. And its ratio of boys to girls is 1 to 1. The two towns hold a carnival, and all the 7th grade students from both towns attend. How many 7th grade students at the carnival are girls? Now, let's go ahead and unpack this problem. Riverside, a town, has 227th grade students. I'm going to use blue for Riverside. Actually, we're going to use turquoise for Riverside. And its ratio of boys to girls is 5 to 6. That's very important for us to know. Salem, and we'll go ahead and use green for Salem, has 287th grade students, and the ratio of boys to girls is 1 to 1. Now these are two towns, and they hold a carnival. Now that's important for us to know. I'm going to go ahead and underline that. All the 7th grade students from both towns attend. Now, it's very important that we understand what the question is asking us, because that's going to determine what calculations we make. It says, how many 7th grade students at the carnival were girls? Now, it's very important that we understand that they're asking us about a specific gender. Excuse me. And the reason why that's important is because when we go to do our calculations, that is going to matter. So I'm going to do this and highlight that they're looking for girls. Now, the text is going to be very important when we solve this information. You know how we like to do? We like to dive into this text, the unpacking, and we want to ask ourselves some questions that's going to pull out important information for us to solve. So let's go ahead and get into that. How many total 7th graders are at Riverside? Remember, Riverside is our turquoise. Well, we're going right into the text. 227th graders. Those are the actual total students at Riverside. What's the ratio of boys to girls? Remember, our ratio is important because we got to know the order. There are 5 boys to 6 girls. And I know that there's 5 boys in my ratio. We'll look at that as like parts. I know that there's 5 because boys are first in the order when we're using our words. And because boys are first and 5 is first in my numeric value of my ratio, that represents the boys. 5 boys to 6 girls. That's my ratio. Part to part. Okay? Part of the students are boys. Part of them are girls. Okay? That's my ratio side. This is my actual number. Very important. Remember, our proportions are always going to be a ratio representation and actual representation. How many total students are 7th graders at Salem? There's 280 7th graders at Salem. What is the ratio of boys to girls? 1 boy to one girl. So for every one boy, there's one girl. Okay? Now, it says all of the 7th graders from both towns, they go to this carnival. So I already know that if I add 280 and 220 together, that I will get the total number of students who attended the carnival. But that's not what they're asking us. They're asking us how many 7th graders were girls at the carnival. So out of this total, how many of them were girls? We're going to set up a proportion for both towns to find out how many were girls from each town. Now, there's a total of 500 students. And out of that total of 500 students, we want to find out how many of them were girls. So let's get into this. Let's first set up the proportions that we need. We're going to look at Riverside first. Remember, ratio side, actual side. Okay? So we're going to use the information we pulled out from our text to set up our proportion for Riverside. Now, this is very important for us to get into because we're going to add an added layer to setting up our proportion. Because our labels have to match, we have got to do some things before we put in our values for our proportion. Now, because the question is asking us about the girls, we are going to focus on the part of the ratios that represent girls. So, again, I'm going to repeat myself. Because the question is asking us about how many students were girls. Remember I told you that was going to be important? Because of that, I'm going to focus on the girls on each of these proportions. That is going to be my numerator for my first proportion. There are 6 girls in the ratio that represent Riverside. Because the question gave me the total 7th graders for Riverside, that is where I have to have the total in my ratio. That may be a little bit confusing. So we have to use our text to understand our labels. Once you understand what labels you need, you'll understand what values need to go with each label. So because they gave me the actual number of total students for Riverside, I need the total in the ratio. So how did we find 11 that represents the total for for this part-to-part ratio? I added 5 plus 6. For every 5 boys, there are 6 girls, which means there's 11 total students in that ratio. Because they're asking us about the girls, that's why I use the 6 value that represents my girls. So 6 girls for every 11 students in the ratio side, the actual side. It's asking me to find the number of girls. I don't know the number of girls, so I'm using my variable. But I do know that there's 220 total students. And I know always the totals are at the bottom. When I cross multiply, then divide. Cross multiply, then divide. Remember, we're cross multiplying number to number. So that's 6 times 220 divided by 11. 120 girls went from Riverside. But it says how many 7th grade students at the carnival are girls. So I've got to find the girls from Salem too. Same thing. I am going to use my total students on the actual side. And because it's asking me about the girls, I'm using the 1 value that represents the girls. And I need total. So how did we find the 2? We're adding both parts of our ratio. 1 to 1 is 1 plus 1, which is 2 total students in the ratio. So for every 2 total students, one of them are going to be girls. So now multiply, cross multiply, then divide. 280 times 1 divided by 2 is 140 girls at Salem. But remember, we need the total number of girls that attended the carnival from both towns. Both towns attended, right there in the text. So I'm going to add the number of girls that attended from Riverside to the number of girls that attended from Salem. 120 plus 140 will give me the total number of girls who attended the carnival. 260 girls. If this were to have said boys, I would have used the representation of boys from each ratio. But because they gave me the totals, in each one of these, I had to have the total students in the ratio form, which means I had to add the numbers that are in the ratios together. Take care.